To recover motor function after a severe neurological injury, a patient must perform task-specific, repetitive practice. The paradox of neurorehabilitation is that severe motor deficits caused by the injury prevent the patient from generating the exact movement required to drive recovery. Conventional physical therapy relies on assistive devices, like continuous passive motion robots, or manual manipulation by a therapist. These methods increase the total dose of practice, but they fail to guarantee intention-contingent timing. The limb moves, but the movement is divorced from the brain's internal command. Brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, solve this by bypassing damaged efferent pathways entirely. Instead of relying on severed biological wires, they establish a direct digital bridge between the brain's intent and the physical environment. By decoding cortical activity in real time, BCIs lock external sensory or motor feedback to the exact millisecond of a patient's neural intent. This temporal precision exploits specific biological laws, Hebbian learning and spike timing-dependent plasticity. Neurons that fire together wire together, but only if the timing is perfectly synchronized. By enforcing this synchronization, BCIs represent a transition from motion-dependent physical therapy to intention-dependent neural therapy. True neurological recovery relies on reorganizing surviving neural networks through precise temporal pairing. Repeating physical motions alone is insufficient. The brain must actively author the movement at the exact moment it occurs. Immediately following an injury like a stroke, the brain enters a plasticity window. Surviving perilesional tissue, the healthy brain matter surrounding the injury, exhibits heightened excitability and synaptic receptivity. However, an ischemic or hemorrhagic lesion physically disrupts the motor pathway. This creates a focal disconnection, isolating the intact, excitable cortex from the muscles it needs to control. This anatomical diagram illustrates the resulting bottleneck. To strengthen a synapse and build a new pathway around that lesion, the brain requires a strict Hebbian constraint: presynaptic neural firing, the intent to move, and postsynaptic activation, the proprioceptive feedback of the actual movement, must fire synchronously. When conventional therapy moves a paralyzed limb, the feedback is delayed or disconnected from the patient's internal effort. The presynaptic neuron fires, but the postsynaptic response arrives late. This timing mismatch prevents efficient learning. Instead of true functional recovery, the brain wires compensatory, maladaptive plasticity. It learns inefficient, weak secondary connections because the primary loop is out of sync. BCI-driven proprioceptive feedback corrects this. By triggering functional electrical stimulation the instant the brain commands a movement, it perfectly aligns the presynaptic firing with a synthetic postsynaptic response, successfully rewiring the circuit. Millisecond-level synchronization between intention and feedback is the prerequisite for recovery. Without it, the biological capacity for reorganization after stroke or spinal cord injury stalls, leaving the neural architecture in its impaired state. Translating a biological intent into a synchronized digital command requires a rigorous engineering pipeline. This block diagram maps the macro workflow of a motor imagery BCI. The signal acquisition phase starts at the source. When a patient imagines a movement, it induces an event-related desynchronization in the mu and beta frequency bands over the sensory motor cortex. The sensors capture these shifting rhythms. In the feature extraction and classification stage, algorithms act as highly specialized filters, isolating these distinct desynchronization signals from the vast background of general neural noise. This becomes complex when the primary motor cortex, particularly the hand knob region, is severely damaged by a stroke. The standard signal origin is gone. To compensate, the decoder must adapt. It learns to track the activation pattern as the brain shifts the workload to the ipsilateral premotor cortex or the supplementary motor area. Once the classifier isolates this adapted intent, it activates the feedback loop trigger. The digital command instantly fires an external effector, like targeted electrical muscle stimulation or a soft robotic glove. The physical movement of that external effector provides congruent, real-time proprioceptive feedback back to the patient's brain. This entire complex engineering pipeline exists solely to artificially recreate the intact nervous system's internal real-time feedback loop. BCI application is not a monolithic therapy. The engineering protocol must directly map to the specific pathophysiological constraints of the disease being treated. This comparative matrix shows how the tools deploy. In stroke and spinal cord injury, the cortex is largely intact but disconnected. Here, we pair motor imagery with functional electrical stimulation to drive rehabilitative structural neuroplasticity. For severe spinal cord injuries, this specific pathway evolves into a brain-spine interface, bridging preserved cortical commands directly to intact spinal locomotor circuits below the lesion. Neurodegenerative conditions require a completely different approach. In late-stage amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and advanced multiple sclerosis, efferent pathways degenerate entirely, and motor imagery capabilities degrade. Motor-driven BCI systems fail in these patients. The engineering strategy must pivot from a rehabilitative driver to an assistive communication bridge. Instead of movement, these systems use P300 event-related potentials and SSVEP, frequency-specific visual responses. These provide low-effort, highly robust communication channels that do not rely on damaged motor networks at all. However, there are strict algorithmic and clinical limitations. When ALS patients enter a complete locked-in state, even these visual paradigms degrade, dropping to near-chance levels of accuracy. Moving away from motor deficits entirely, BCIs present a novel clinical target for neuropathic pain. By utilizing real-time fMRI and EEG neurofeedback, BCIs provide patients a tool to consciously modulate their own pain networks. The clinical goal here is highly specific, targeting the rostral anterior cingulate cortex to actively downweight the maladaptive central sensitization causing chronic pain. Selecting the correct BCI paradigm, whether repairing a broken motor circuit, bypassing it entirely for communication, or downregulating a hyperactive pain network, is dictated entirely by the underlying pathology. Despite these proofs of concept, rigorous engineering constraints continue to hold back the widespread clinical translation of BCI therapy. This chart visualizes the primary data issue. BCI systems face extreme anatomical variability between subjects, and EEG signals are highly non-stationary. Over the course of a session, the neural data gradually drifts outside of static classification boundaries. Because static decoders cannot adapt to this drift, systems require frequent, exhausting recalibration sessions. This fatigues the patient and severely limits the feasibility of independent home use. The research roadmap for the next generation of BCI development centers on solving this bottleneck with self-architecting decoders. This requires moving toward individualized, continuous cortical network modeling. The software must update live, mapping the patient's brain dynamics as they actively train. A self-architecting decoder acts autonomously, assembling optimal signal processing chains and adapting online to shifting neural states within a single session, without forcing the user to pause and recalibrate. The ultimate engineering target pairs these adaptive decoders with advanced peripheral nerve interfaces, creating proprioceptive right-back mechanisms that restore the actual physical sensation of limb movement to impaired neural circuits. BCI-driven neurorehabilitation re-engineers the human nervous system's capacity to heal itself. This is the transformation of a mechanical assistive tool into a biological catalyst for recovery.